Hello everybody. You will soon see my discussion with FIDE Master Nate Solon on evaluating chess positions. Evaluation is a crucial part of chess calculation because without evaluating the resulting position, calculation becomes useless. Despite its critical importance in calculation, evaluation is an underrepresented skill. It needs separate training as it is. That's why we challenged each other with some instructive positions with Nate. Nate prepared some positions and he tested me live, and I did the same for Nate. Please join us in those moments. Stop the video and evaluate those positions yourself first before you listen to our thought. This way, we also gave you a chance to listen to how candidate master like myself and FIDE master like Nate is approaching those positions. And please join this discussion, folks. If there's a particular position that surprises you when it comes to evaluations, please write to me. Listening to a stronger player, thinking out loud, is one of the most effective ways of learning any skill, including chess, especially for beginners. So please use this chance and grow as players. Meanwhile, please stop the video and evaluate those positions first before you listen to our explanations and analysis. If you disagree, please give me feedback and I will respond to your comments. I hope you will love this episode. I enjoyed it myself. Even my ego was boosted slightly as I was doing okay in most positions, but you will be the best judge. Now I will leave you with Nate Solon. Hello again, dear chess lovers. So today I have FIDE Master Nate Solon. Nate wrote this beautiful book, guys, Evaluate Like a Grandmaster, together with the Grandmaster Eugene Perlstein, right? A couple of years ago already. I love it myself. I read it a long time ago. I read it again recently. In this book, he mentions the importance of evaluations in chess and trains the skill of evaluating positions, because without evaluation, calculation is sort of useless. And yet, it is so underrepresented, this skill. I got so many requests from people on YouTube as well to talk about evaluations. I thought this is best when it's done with another coach. We can challenge each other. We can think out loud in positions. That's why I invited Nate today. Nate, thank you so much for joining the show.
Oh yeah, thanks for having me again.
Yes, so we both prepare some positions for each other, Nate. And the idea is, again, just to challenge each other live, be honest with ourselves and our thought processes, and just, think out loud while looking at those positions, evaluate them. I guess you even have several puzzles on visualize first and then evaluate the resulting position, just like in a real game. We can even show some comparisons, sort of quartets. What would happen if we slightly tweak a position and evaluate it like that? Yeah, because that's also quite valuable when it comes to the skill. Do you want to add anything else, Nate, when it comes to the importance of the skill? Maybe the centipawn stuff, because you also wrote extensively about this, right? The centipawn evaluation / Lila and so on.
Yeah, I have a long post about this, but basically I think this centipon evaluation, that's sort of the most common way of expressing it, because it's what the engine used, doesn't really make that much sense. I mean, we sort of pretend it does because it's what we're all used to, because we look at these engine things. So the issue with it is like it changes with every version of the engine, and it's not real. The numbers aren't really tied to anything. Like supposedly 1 point equals 1 pawn, but it doesn't really seem to work like that. So I think the numbers are a bit random. I mean, that said, if that's what you're used to, you can kind of use that, but really I think it would make more sense to think of it in terms, even the old school ones of like white is slightly better or white is much better, or what would really make the most sense to me as someone who's played a lot of poker as well, is to think of it in terms of expected value. So like, this is like a 70% position for me, which would mean essentially if we played this position out 100 or 1,000 times, on average, I would score 0.7 points per game. But that's quite unfamiliar to most chess players.
Yes, you're so much used to having this pawn evaluations, +3, +2, I have an extra exchange, I should be +2 pawns and so on, like this generic numeric values of pieces and so on. But as you say, as long as you have some yardsticks to evaluate positions, if you have some templates to judge positions, then that's what you're searching for, right? Because again, without the evaluation function, then calculation is sort of useless. We have to have some sort of end states in mind, And I'm curious about the positions that we discussed today, because I even prepared some. To me, it wasn't even so clear. I will have your judgment about this. I thought even while the machines are giving, let's say, a certain score, to my mind, maybe there are different evaluations for human. That's also interesting to discuss, how human evaluation sometimes differs with the engine and so on. I'm definitely looking forward to this discussion, Nate. Do you want to kick off and show positions, or should I start? You decide.
Oh, either way. What would you prefer?
Okay, well, I mean, let me test you first, right? Let me test you first. Okay, let's start from this, okay? By the way, in all the positions I show you, Nate, today, it's always a side that you're facing right now that is on the move. For example, here it's black to move, okay? So it's a game between Karpov and Kasparov. It's black to play, and I want you to just give me an evaluation. You can use your own terms, centipawns, expected values,
Okay, great. So, yeah, well, maybe I can sort of talk about my thought process.
Yeah.
So yeah, I was talking about this. I started using this acronym KMAP, which this was funny because I saw this in one of my students' evaluations. I was like, oh, I kind of like that. Where did you get that? And then it turned out he
Your
got
book.
it from a different coach who actually sort of adapted it from our book. So it came sort of full circle.
Full circle. Yeah.
But it stands for, so it's king safety, material, activity, pawn structure.
So you put material before activity. That's interesting.
Yeah. I mean, you could debate the order. I do kind of like that order though, because king safety is not a huge factor in every position, but when it is a factor, it can be a dominant factor, right? Because obviously checkmate ends the game. So if one side has a big problem with king safety, that can trump everything else. And then I do think it makes sense to start with material quite early because it's relatively simple. You can count up the point values.
Yeah.
And it is quite a dominant factor in chess. I think there's sort of this mentality that it's like, oh, we're all so shallow to be obsessed with material. And, Leela shows us that, it's really all about activity. But, realistically, most chess games, at least between humans, are decided by material. Like, the easiest way to beat people at most levels of chess is certainly to take their pieces. And the easiest way to lose is to give away your pieces. So, I do think material is like, in practical chess, is quite a dominant factor. And then activity, and then I also think it makes sense to have the pawn structure last because, well, I mean, in some sense, the pawn structure infuses everything because it sort of determines what's possible on the board. But if you're thinking about like a weak pawn or a doubled pawn, often maybe the worst case scenario is that you would lose that pawn. So it's like, that's not even as bad as being down a single pawn. So things like pawn weaknesses tend to become important when none of the other factors are wildly out of balance.
I see. Let's say deep in endgame where king safety is not important, and maybe they can, let's say, be more important at that stage. But how about giving more weight to pass pawns like this, for example, right? Like Kasparov has a pass pawn on d5, for example.
Yeah, that could be. I mean, certainly that could be important. So it's always, it's hard to wrap everything up in one thing. But anyway, I like though that if you just remember that acronym, then you can kind of, I think these little devices to remind yourself can be really helpful.
I see. What was it again? Can you tell us the acronym?
Yeah, KMAP. So it's
KMAP.
king safety, material, activity, and pawn structure.
Okay.
But okay, so to apply this to this, this position, I mean, thinking about king safety, it looks like both kings are potentially weak. Like certainly our king, the light squares are weak, and you have to be a little bit concerned about a queen landing on h7. But then at the same time, White's king has a better pawn shield, but the f2 pawn is potentially weak. Like we have some pressure there, and our bishop can attack. So, I mean, something people may know about bishops of opposite colors is it favors the attacker, right? So, because the bishops one bishop can't defend what the other attacks. So whoever is attacking, whoever has the initiative, tends to do very well with the bishops of opposite color. Materials equal. Yeah, it's always important to count that. I've noticed when I give students a puzzle, like sometimes they'll think for a long time, but they may not realize, their upper rook or downer rook, which really informs what you're trying to do in the position, right? Because if you're upper rook, you only have to survive. If you're downer rook, you have to make something big happen very
Yeah.
quickly. Usually
Yeah,
either
yeah.
like a mating threat or a big material gain. But okay, yeah, there's also this pass D pawn, which for the moment is quite far from queening, but could become a factor. I would also want to make sure that there's no tactics in the position because you don't want to you want to evaluate in a stable position. So if there's a forcing line available,
Right.
you want to consider that. So for instance, like it looks sort of plausible that like rook takes f2 or something could be a word, but I don't think it works. Rook takes, bishop e3. Actually, we just get checkmated with queen e8. So
Right.
yeah, it looks like there's no. I don't see any forcing sequence immediately. So yeah, as far as the evaluation, I don't know. I would guess this is. I always get nervous because I'm supposed to be the expert on evaluation. I'm like, oh, what if I'm so wrong?
No,
But
nobody's expert. No, no,
you
no.
know,
It's
um,
hard. It's hard.
so my thought, unless I'm missing something, is that it's probably one that the computer will evaluate as equal. Because there's equal material. Bishops of opposite color can also have drawish tendencies. So if neither side can really make something happen, it could be equal. I would say, like, as black, I certainly don't like the weakness of the king, right? Because for the moment, white's queen can't get onto that diagonal to threaten mate, but probably someday white can maneuver onto those squares.
Right.
So in fact, I'd like to, as black, I think I would like to trade the queens here if I could, but I don't know if I can force that. So I guess I'm going to say, like, probably according to the engine, this is equal, but I'm a little bit uncomfortable as black because, I'm concerned about white's queen getting onto those light squares and creating threats against my king. And while there's some pressure on f2, I don't really see a direct way to increase that. I mean, maybe I should really try to get my bishop on to like b6 and potentially even give up the d5 pawn if necessary to achieve that.
Interesting. So you consider ideas like this potentially.
Yeah. I mean, I have to be careful I'm not
attack
going to get hit with like queen d6 or something, but I was considering something like bishop d8, queen d6, queen f4, queen takes d5, bishop b6.
Right.
Perhaps I could even give up that pawn, but if I tie white down to the f2 square, then again, I'm not so sure about that because even if I could play bishop takes f2, king h1, I don't know if I've accomplished it.
Yes, that's also what I saw, right?
But okay, I don't know. Is that I guess that's enough for to say
Yeah,
my
I think that
evaluation.
was enough. I think you really laid down your thoughts. I mean, if I haven't checked this for a long time, but if my hunch is serving correctly, I think it's slightly. I mean, not slightly, maybe heavily in white's favor. I'm not sure how heavy it is, but maybe plus 1.5. The chess.com has, I'm not sure what engine it uses, like stock with 17, right? But it's, I mean, if you press on this right now, you will see some evaluation and some lines.
Oh,
Yeah, you see,
it's actually a big plus for
it's
white.
it's a big plus, yeah, and it boils down to what you said. It's about king safety ultimately, and opposite color bishops favoring the attack, and lack of this pawn cover around the black king and light squares. It's quite serious actually. Advantage for white already. You see,
Okay, so yeah, I kind of was looking at the key factor, but I underestimated how important it really is.
yeah,
That's probably a good example also of what you were talking about of it's different for human. Actually, in this case, it's so good even the computer likes white, but probably in a practical game, it may be even worse because
yeah,
what I found is like when you have this issue like persistent king safety issues, a computer may be able to just defend it
yeah,
indefinitely without ever messing up.
yeah.
But when you have these sort of static flaws in your position that create constant danger,
Yes,
it's very hard to actually play a whole game without messing up.
I totally think so. Yeah, for a human, it's very difficult actually. And it's a long-term thing, as you mentioned. It's not easy at all, yeah, for the black king to ever reach to full safety in his position. It's just not going to be possible. Like there, no pawns can appear here. There is no light square bishop, as you mentioned. It'll be forever a problem for you to face. And just to show you how the game went, I mean, not move by move, but just very, very quickly how Karpov played in this position. Queen g6, king g8, right? Like he just shows who is the boss with repetitions. Bishop f5. And then I think the final piece is slowly coming to the game, yeah? Again, queen g6, always repeating these moves, like improving the bishop. And then, yeah, after a couple of repetitions, king g2, he's tucking the king on g2, I believe, yeah? It always helps. And now, like, some h4 business can also come at some point. Yeah, here that's critical, by the way. Should we exchange the queens? No, because the opponent's king is not safe, right? So he keeps the queens on the board like this. And black cannot force a queen trade in this position. And then finally, the final piece is coming, I guess, yeah? Final piece is coming slowly. Yeah, this is beautiful. Rook d1, rook d3, look at this. Look at rook maneuvering, yeah? This was beautiful, yeah? These three moves with the rook. Like the final piece is now joining the attack on the king side. And already here, like +3, it becomes +3, right? It's just very, very difficult to defend this position.
Did you say this is Kasparov-Karpov?
Yeah, this is Karpov-Kasparov. I guess from the
So it shows how
1985.
difficult, like even Kasparov could not actually survive for very long.
Yeah, it's so hard. It's so hard. And there are so many ways for white to win, but he chooses this very forcing finish, I believe. Yeah, queen c4, bishop h7. I mean, look at the king. It's always the king, yeah? Just look at the black king. Never reached safety, and now Kasparov resigned. Like mate in 7 by force in this position. It's just so amazing. Like the queen is also tied down here, right? The king has no squares, and the bishop is useless. It's just disaster. So, yeah, this was beautiful, yeah? Like in 25 moves, he resigns, but the evaluation was already set in terms of king safety in some sense. So this was a very striking example when I saw this first. I thought this was a good evaluation exercise because he chose this, yeah? He actively chose to come to this position, and this was correct. Well, most of us would maybe rate this pawn a little bit higher. Yeah, it's a pass pawn, but king safety is most important in this position.
Yeah, I also noticed Karpov used a lot of patience. I think a lot of players get kind of impatient, or when they're slightly better, they want to make something happen very quickly.
Right.
But he improved the position very patiently.
Very, very patient play indeed. Yeah, typical Karpov. Okay, so maybe I can test you with one more when we already screen sharing. Let me see if we don't show the moves, yeah? Yep. So how about this one, Nate? This is also about some pawn storms. Maybe if you're a dragon player yourself or Sicilian player, maybe some intuition about this. Black to play.
Yeah, sort of like a dragon or Sicilian. So, and white has this this pawn structure with c takes b3.
Yeah.
I know that recapture. So it's quite unusual. Of course, usually in chess you recapture towards the center. But I know in these Sicilian positions, sometimes c takes b3 is supposed to be smart because then you put your king on b1 and your king can be quite safe.
Right. You can even play a3 at some point, which wasn't be the case if you take with this a pawn.
So that could actually be in white's favor, and so we've got kings on opposite sides, right? Which typically means pawn storm, and white has already started pushing the king side pawns, and it looks like they're going to play h5. Whereas black, it seems like we're not very far along with our king side attack. I mean, we do have the open c file with our rook lined up with the king, but I think white is just going to play king b1 very quickly.
Yes.
So for instance, like queen a5, king b1, and then I guess I would say unless we have some way to seize the initiative and create threats immediately as black, I would think white stands better, because white clearly, given a few moves, white is going to have a powerful attack with h5, opening up the h file, perhaps bishop c4, maybe queen h2, maybe bishop h6. Like, given a few moves, white can certainly increase the power of that attack. Whereas with black, we have to try to attack with the pieces, but I'm just not sure if it's going to work. For instance, knight b4, king a2, queen a5. It's actually not even threatening anything, because rook takes c3 would be met by pawn on b takes c3, and the queen is even
and the queen defense.
So yeah, I think what I'm talking myself into is that that white is much better because it's a sort of it's a position where each side's plan is to attack the other's king, but I think white is much better set up to execute that plan than we are in the position. So I think white is just going to play king b1 and sort of secure their king, and then they're going to go back to attacking our king. And I actually don't see much of a way for us as black to build up the attack.
Yeah. We also gave up this light square bishop, right, for that knight on b3.
Yeah.
That's how we sort of came about to this. So white has this unopposed light square bishop in this position too. Yeah, so I guess you're correct with this judgment. If I'm not wrong, it was just heavily in white's favor. So let's see what the ninja says. Okay, 1.3 almost. Yeah, 1.25 it says. But queen a5, yes, that's one of the main ideas. Let's say queen a5. But even after queen a5, king b1, as you mentioned, right? It's just not easy at all to continue this attack. Like you mentioned knight b4, for example. Without this a pawn, if white took this way to capture on b3, this will be more dangerous because then, you know, there is no more a3 potential for white, for example. But here they can even play a3 as was given by the engine. And that's the biggest advantage of this structure with cb than ab. Yeah, the king has just simply more pawns to cover. And now you just lose time with knight c6 and so on. But even as you mentioned, it's black to move here, then this doesn't work because after they take back, the queen defends a2 in this position. So yeah, we cannot go knight b4 apparently. And this engine gives some moves like h5, which is, I mean, not that easy to play, yeah, to say it that way in those positions. And claim that maybe you're stopping h5 from white, and maybe not, it's not terrible, but objectively, I think white is already this. Also, practically, I think just easier to play for white because of the attacking chances and so on. So this was correct judgment. I just show because he takes b3 looks very strange. In fact, it's all about king safety. Yeah, that's why they did this move basically, because that's the pawn storm position where king safety is even more important in those positions. Nate, do you agree? Yeah, for example, the value of material is going down in a position like that, even more, I would say. So because the whole goal becomes who will attack the opponent's king and who will mate them first in some sense. So in those positions, to my mind, you should be even more willing to, let's say, sacrifice material or even not care about the structure, as in this case. Yeah, why just ruin their structure? And they claim king safety is more important in this position, which
absolutely
justifies this.
Like a typical idea. In this case, white's already played g4, but often in this structure, you could even just play h5 without even playing g4 and sacrifice the pawn if necessary.
Yeah. Yes. That's
it's also, it's like understanding which phase of the game you're playing for. Is an endgame, c takes b3 might not be ideal because, well, black could create a pass pawn with like e6 and d5, or those wing pawns in an endgame are not going to be very useful.
Yep.
But in this case, white understood that the game is more likely to be decided in the middle game. Like there's no way for black to get the queens off the board.
Right.
So white's playing for an attack on the king. That's when you're hunting big game, it's like there's no you can, if you're going for the king, you can afford to let a lot of other things slide as long as that attack
gets
there.
That's right. That's also the orientation phase is so important. I mean, I call this orientation phase. You can also call this evaluation phase. Like what is the biggest imbalance here? Like if you look at a position like this, what is the most striking factor to evaluate this position? I would say it's the king's locations, right? Like this catches the eye. You also saw it very early in your evaluations. Like you saw the kings have castle on opposite flanks. And this is a crucial information, right? To read the game plan. White is going for attack against the king. Pawn storm. Why pawn storm? Because of the king's locations. They castle on opposite flanks, which means we can easily rush pawns and open up lines, without worrying about our king safety on that side of the board. So this initial phase even, you can call this evaluation, you can call this orientation phase, is also giving us crucial information of choosing the plans, but also maybe to evaluate who is better, Given this orientation phase, the king safety is the most important in this position. Then okay, you judge this to be a better version for white because you just have more pawn cover around your king, right?
Yeah, I wrote another post about, I was talking about planning in terms of, the movie The Princess Bride. Are you a fan of that one?
No.
Okay.
Can you tell us?
It's a great movie for kids, but also for adults. But
The Princess Bride, yes, of course. I watched it. Yes.
The scene where they're about to storm the castle, and he says, "What are our assets?" So I kind of used that as a framework to think about. you have to think what are your assets and what are your liabilities in the position, and often making a plan is to try to guide the game into a channel where the game is all about your assets and
Right.
so
Right.
in this case for white, like you want the game to be about this pawn storm. You don't want to allow the game to go into an end game where your doubled pawns would not be so great.
That's right. That's so beautiful. And White does that because he already maybe sees a hook pawn on g6, right? But White understands that h4, h5 will open up lines on the king side and make this rook happy, right? And he doesn't see the same kind of storm on this side of the board. It will be more difficult for black heavy pieces to join the attack on the queen side. And he trusts that his assets over here will be more important. That's also more or less what Jeremy Silman said, right? In the imbalances approach. I mean, you generally identify the imbalances, let's say differences between two positions, and you just try to intensify the imbalance that already serves you, right? Like if you have the developmental advantage, for example, then you want to intensify it by playing actively, by creating threats, attacking targets, so you don't give time to the opponent to consolidate and so on. So they are very much tied in that sense. But this was correct. So far in both positions, by the way. Oh, I will just skip this part because people saw it. Yeah, lines should have been closed. I will just skip this part. I mean, this is maybe not so interesting because it's about just Benoni evaluations, right? It's also about Anand Kamsky, I believe, this position. This position is Anand Kamsky. It's basically typical Benoni. Besides, these pawns are blocked on the queen side, right? This majority lost its strength, while he's keeping this e5 option on the board, basically. So this segment maybe is about like pawn structure evaluations and how we sort of compare a position given the certain templates of a structure. Yeah, this case it involves some Benoni understanding, for example, that white gets a better version. Let me see the other one. Okay, I'm curious about this evaluation actually, Nate. So so it's white to play. And last year I was working on Najdorf course, which I stopped at some point because it was too insanely complex and difficult. Not the best choice of an opening if it comes to your first opening on Chessable. So at some point it became a sunk cost fallacy. I just decided to quit.
Yeah,
But it was one of those
think,
positions.
the Najdorf's a great opening for professionals, but I would say not the most practical opening for amateurs, unless
Right.
if you just love the opening and you love opening resource and you're willing to sort of commit to the Najdorf for life. I mean, obviously, objectively, it's a great opening. It's a really exciting opening, but I would say, it's right up there with the hardest openings to play. Maybe the King's Indian is also similarly difficult, but like, it's so complicated. There's so many different structures and options, and you have a giant target on your back because it's sort of the most famous Sicilian. So,
Yeah.
yeah, I don't usually recommend the Najdorf to most people.
Yep. I
Unless
just
they
love
want
it
to make
because I
really
just
a
started
big-
like that. Yeah, like Fischer and Kasparov games was my first, and it sort of became a love. And I also got some good scores over the years. So of course, I'm biased here, but it's difficult. But it was one of those, positions that I got in that course, certain evaluations. I'm just curious of how you approach this position. It's white to play, right? What would you say in terms of evaluation?
Yeah, so in this case, well, we're in endgame, so king safety is not a big factor. White's up a pawn. And, yeah, this is a really interesting one because here, sometimes like all the factors go one way, and one side is just dominating. But then the trickier ones are when you have different factors running against each other, right?
Right.
Like this. So white's up a pawn, so clearly that's in white's favor. And additionally, the pawn structure, black has the doubled isolated pawns, which could be weak. But then counter to that, you have black's pieces are pretty active. Like, so essentially it's material and pawn structure pitted against activity because black's
Right.
rook on the c file is active. If the knight moves, then c2 will drop, and then black can potentially increase the pressure with, perhaps bishop b4, maybe b5, b4, maybe rook c4. So I feel like the punchline of this one is going to be that black's activity actually compensates for the material deficit. And this would be a good, we were talking about the comparison. This would be an interesting comparison because what I suspect is that black is okay in this position, but if you just slide white's knight one square to d3, perhaps white would be much better.
Interesting.
Because then
Yeah.
you're looking at the weakness on e5, and then you can cover your own pawn with c3,
Okay.
which is perhaps what you'd like to arrange here, but it's not so easy because if you play rook c2, maybe you get hit by bishop c5. The bishop could maybe go to d4, or maybe just rook c4, looking at e4 and preparing to double on the c file.
Right,
So
right.
it's not. I'm not. It's not so easy to untangle and to get that knight to a better square.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Very, very important. All these double pawns, by the way, they also control some key central squares. Yeah, for example, knight d5 and so on.
There's actually
Are not allowed.
there's a common pattern just come up in a few recent lessons of the knight on c3 versus a pawn on c6, or you can have different versions of that, but essentially a knight, I guess three, however you want to call it, 3 or 2 squares away from a pawn,
Yeah,
where the pawn is dominating the knight,
yeah,
and that's not where you want to place your knight. And so here there's no pawn on c6, but the pawns on a6 and e6 are restricting
stuffing
the
that
knight
guy.
in a similar way, where it can't jump forward.
yeah, yes. Typical Sicilian c-file pressure. That's in the case. Also, e4 pawn is weak. That's relevant because of some rook c4s. Bishop b4 ideas for sure. Even b5, b4 is a thought for black for sure. So if you have to ask the engine, what do you think engine will say here in terms of eval? If you have to be precise, do you think it's just rough equal?
I don't know. Maybe I'll say like plus +0.2 or something.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
If I have to force you, which side would you choose in a practical game? What would you say?
Yeah. Well, often I think it's easier to have the activity
Uh-huh.
than the material. Trying to think if white, does white have some sort of bailout where we can give the material back and get to like a very safe position? But
Yeah.
maybe not. I mean, maybe I'd play like rook ad1 and try to play rook d7 and just not worry about the material. If black wants to somehow win my pawns back.
Yeah, that's also a thought.
Yeah, maybe I would. I don't know. Maybe I would even take black. Black certainly has easier moves, right? Like black, rook c4, b5, and so on.
I think you have a point there. It's easier to see moves for black, right, than white. That's interesting. That's interesting. Like talking about the practicality of certain, structures or positions. We can clearly see improving moves for black. Like give 3 moves to black, I'm improving step by step, But it's hard to see same kind of improvement for white in this position.
Yeah, exactly.
Having said that, if we can achieve your idea, as you mentioned, maybe we'll have a good game. But even that is not so clear how we achieve that, So I would say, if I'm not wrong, I don't remember by heart, but my hunch is just around 0, 0, 0, 0, right? Like typical engine. Look at the evaluation,
Yeah.
right? Like 0, 0, rook a d1, by the way. This was your move.
Sometimes in positions that look like this, the engine will find some like very clever, unexpected way to consolidate for the side that's up material.
Yeah.
But it looks like that's not the case here. White's just under some pressure.
Right. There are even moves like bishop a3. Can you see it, Nate? We missed it actually.
Oh yeah.
There are
No,
even
I
bishop a3 source.
At some point, I had to know. One thing I do, I make these flashcards of moves I missed.
Right.
At some point, I had missed like this similar bishop a3 tactic in several positions.
Yeah. Yeah. I sort of also missed it from afar actually. Yeah. I couldn't recall exactly in this position. I should have remembered this idea. But bishop a3. But even b5, normal moves like this will keep
Yeah,
the
I guess
pressure.
if necessary, if rook d7.
Yeah.
I mean, even bishop f6 is if black is really concerned about the king side, but I
Yeah.
you would want to place your bishop more actively.
Potentially. But even this doesn't create threat. So b4 followed by rook c2 here is very good. So then the machine, is of course moves like rook d2 to defend c2. And then you see moves like even rook f8. That's interesting. Rook trade. But yeah, even bishop b4 is you're back to square one. Pinning that knight. I can always take on c3. And then just defending moves like this. It's just okay. So you can of course always take the knight on c3. Sometimes you can even trade the rook. Sometimes you go rook c4, followed by rook c8, for example. With best play engine is defending somehow. You see like 0, 0, 0s. That's also very typical engine, right? Like you see those zeros all the time. But definitely one side has more practical chances, and maybe that's one way of understanding. If one side is clear improving plans like this, then probably practically easier to play for black.
The clock is what like in tournament games, the clock is a huge factor, and when one side is defending and doesn't have easy moves, right? That's a scenario where many
Right.
people tend to get into time pressure.
Right, right. So going back to your C map evaluation, right?
K-map.
K-map evaluation.
Yeah.
So K was, yeah, of course. So king was not important, king safety in this case. Material wise, white was better. Structure wise, white was also maybe better. Yeah, like double pawns. That's also a big pawn though. I mean,
Yeah.
okay, on the formal level, yeah, let's say white is also better in structural sense. And yet we saw activity compensated for all these things, right? That's interesting. So could that be one argument of maybe placing the A slightly above the material or structure side of things when it comes to this position?
Um, yeah, it is. It definitely can be. I mean, I think it depends on how big each advantage is and like also what level you're talking about. Because I mean, if you're talking about a lower level, you have positions where one side is up like a rook or something, you know.
Right.
Whereas like a pawn, this is actually something I've noticed with my students who are not as strong, maybe up to like 1200, let's say, is if you haven't been playing chess as long, I've noticed people tend not to appreciate how huge of an advantage it is to be up a piece in chess.
Right.
So it's like, according to our point system, a pawn is 1, a piece is 3. So it's like 3 times as much. But then if you have the feel for how chess games play out, you realize that it's like 1,000 times as much, because when you're up a piece, unless something disastrous is happening to you right away, you
It's
should win
huge.
pretty comfortably. Just like if you're down a pawn, you can keep playing a normal game and maybe make a draw or turn things around. If you're down a piece, you're like your guys just can't fight the opponent's guys. So that's really bad.
Yeah, that makes a huge difference, of course. Yeah. This position was given. This was my only comparison. Maybe I can stop after this because you also need to show me some positions. Just compare with the previous one. Yeah, it's an Najdorf again from the same course that never happened. So we are down a pawn. We are down a pawn as black. It's white to move. Do you see any differences, or would you still call this, easier to play for black in some sense?
My initial thought is maybe this one's even better for black because the bishop is so
Uh-huh.
beautifully placed on e5.
Uh-huh.
Looking at the knight, looking at the d2 pawn, can't really be chased away. We also don't have the doubled pawns.
Right.
There is one fewer pair of rooks on the board, so I guess that means we won't be able to double on the c file. But yeah, my first thought is obviously it's similar. Black has compensation for the pawn in terms of activity, but maybe this is even a better version for
Right.
black because the bishop is just so strong.
So amazing.
And also White's king is restricted by that bishop too, so there could even be
Right.
back rank threats.
Yeah, that's also my hunch, by the way. It's been a long time since I looked at the position, but I agree with you so far with your judgments. I mean, I guess the best white can bail out is okay, give up the pawn and play the rook endgame somehow. I guess white will be very happy if that
Yeah.
happens. Yeah. Yeah. But I guess that's the case. I mean, we can have a look at the engine. I believe you're right, by the way. You see, engine also likes black, despite them being a pawn down in this case. So you were totally correct with that judgment. It gives moves like rook d1, for example. Yeah, please take my knight, please win a pawn, because then I will have this rook d7 ideas and so on. But black shouldn't take the pawn. They should
Yeah.
play b5. That's also instructive. Yeah, just put more pressure on that knight, which wasn't doing much anyway because of the pawn on e6, as you mentioned. Yeah, and again, I like as neither of players, we are dying to get an endgame like this, right? This is when real grind takes place as neither of players because that's a beautiful endgame that you can really outplay people. Yes, cool. Then let me see whether I have something else left. But otherwise, if you have like 45 minutes left, maybe you can also show me some positions.
So I've got a few positions.
Yeah.
There is a theme, but I'm not. Maybe I won't tell you. And
Don't tell.
if
Don't
you
tell
can
the
guess
team.
it. And then, but they are. Well, evaluation plays a role. Certain. I mean, I guess you could argue evaluation always plays a role, but also in some of them, including this one, there may be some forcing lines as well.
Okay. So is that what you mean, like visualize and then evaluate the resulting position kind of a thing?
Yeah. So what do you think of this? So this one was white to play.
It's white to play in this position. Okay. I mean, how did the queen even end up on b6?
Yeah.
It looks impossible, right? Like the c7 pawn is still there, and somehow we see a queen on b6.
Yeah.
It's like a made-up position at first sight. But okay, that's a whole different story, I guess. The first thing I noticed is the queen's placement on b6. I mean, maybe there are some knight a4s directly, yeah, to trap the queen. But I believe there's queen a5, and it's not so easy to trap the piece. But that's the first thing I noticed directly. Otherwise, of course, the symmetrical pawn structure. We don't face any direct threats like knight takes d4. I mean, we can put pressure on the d5 pawn by, let's say, attack the knight on f6 with bishop g5, but that's definitely requires some calculation. They can even defend the pawn on d5 potentially. Although wait, because if they defend the pawn with bishop e6, then we can always double their pawns, and that's maybe an evaluation itself, right? Maybe you're trying to maybe you're asking me to evaluate the resulting position with double pawns on the king side. So let's see what else I'm noticing directly. I mean, I'm still coming back to knight a4, but queen a5 only helps black to my mind, so I don't see exactly how that helps us. So I'm sort of giving up on that idea.
Yeah, and if bishop g5, can black take on b2?
Yes, that's a whole different story as well that I should have mentioned. No, because of knight a4, right? Because of knight a4 and the queen is trapped.
Exactly. Yeah, and that's where pattern recognition is helpful. Like,
Yeah,
if you haven't seen that idea before, it's pretty shocking, but this is
it's hard.
actually a typical pattern. In some positions, you would even play a3 to indirectly defend a pawn on b2 in that way.
Yes, yes, very typical. You see, we already noticed the queen running short of squares on b6. That was very early on that I saw that. So yeah, that was sort of in the back of my head in terms of protecting b2. But that's a pattern, of course, with the pawn on a3, which sort of makes bishop g5 safe. Then the question is, yeah, how do you evaluate the resulting position, right? Now you're attacking the pawn on d5 indirectly. And I mean, there are two different ways to defend, knight e7 or bishop e6. But against both, I just double your pawns on the king side. But then the question is, how good is that for me? You know, like how do you judge that resulting position? Is it, I can certainly see good sides of this. But for example, can we attack the black king in that position? Do we have enough manpower to go and attack the king? Or whether they can play king h8 or rook g8 and maybe claim that that's not a big deal. They gain activity. So that will take real, like, yeah, as you say, evaluating the resulting positions for me to go for that idea altogether.
Yeah. So,
Because if I don't take the knight, then what's the point of bishop g5? I mean, after bishop e6, black is also getting the pieces out in that sense, you know? That's what I'm seeing.
all right, very good. And then so that yeah, so far your analysis is good. But there's another option after knight a4, queen a5. You stop there.
C3, yeah, because I was going to come back to it. That was my second point, yeah? Knight a4, queen a5, c3 guards my knight, and I reiterate the threat of b4. This was my second point behind the move, knight a4. Is that getting me closer to the solution, perhaps?
C3 is interesting. Maybe black has to play b5 there.
Yeah, there's b5 though.
But there's actually a way to trap the queen by force.
Wait, then I missed it altogether. Let's see. No, really? Bishop d2, queen a4, b3 does the job? Oh boy.
Yes, you just
Okay, wow.
you give the knight, but the queen is
And then b3.
so just
Yeah.
to say that in case if people aren't following, knight a4, queen a5, bishop d2,
2, yeah.
queen takes a4, b3, and the queen's out of squares. But
That's right.
it's not so simple because black can play queen takes a3, give up the queen for. They already got a knight. So
Yeah.
queen takes a3, rook takes a3, bishop
Rook and a
takes
bishop.
a3. And then this is a good question I like to ask when we're working on calculation or visualization is at some point in the line you pause and you say, okay, what's the material, right?
Yeah.
So at that point, what's the material? What has black got for the queen?
Very, very good question. Very good question. So black got a rook, a bishop, and a pawn for the queen.
Yeah. So technically 9 points to 9 points. So equal in
Yeah.
points, but not necessarily equal in position. So then here's where I think it's interesting and where evaluation really comes into play. This is often how it works in a practical game is the key to evaluation. You have to compare, right?
Right.
Because you can either go for bishop g5, and then after bishop e6 or knight e7, you double black's kingside pawns, or you can win their queen, but in exchange for a rook, a pawn, and a knight. So to decide which option to go for, you have to evaluate both and think about which is better. And I think they both seem good, but then the question is how good and like which one is better.
Yeah. That's a great point. That's a great point. The problem is we're already down in some rabbit hole, right? We need to visualize two different positions.
Yeah.
They're not in front of us.
Yeah,
that's the challenge.
That's the challenge.
That's the challenge, right? That's why Karpov says what separates really strong players is the evaluation of the resulting position and not the current position, right? So it's just some comparisons like that. Also, of course, intuition plays a role here because you cannot brute force calculate everything. So you have to trust certain like quick judgments. Like at that point, for example, in the queen sacrifice line, I mean, we still keep the bishop on the board, right? We still keep the dark square bishop. We still keep the bishop pair on the board. And we still have the good pieces, so to speak, that we can quickly maneuver to the king side. Some bishop g5, maybe even at that point, comes to mind. There are still issues maybe in black's king side. Some bishop d3, maybe some rook lifts to organize an attack on the king side, using the power of our queen, because she's a very powerful piece. We can quickly organize something on the king side. Before, black's two rooks to show their strength against our queen. You know what I mean? Because in some sense, we gave up the rook on a1, which was not doing anything. And then the question is, can we quickly organize some dynamic play in the middle game using our queen? And I see some potential, on the king side. We have good pieces looking at the king side. I cannot calculate everything from afar, but I'm trusting that should be good for white, that resulting position. That's my hunch.
That's exactly right. And yeah, you're really right to highlight the attacking potential of the queen, whereas black's rooks are not really doing anything yet.
Yeah.
So in this case, it's
that was right. 94.
Yeah.
Cool.
Both moves are good. The engine likes trapping the queen even more.
Cool.
So, if you go for bishop g5, you're still doing well.
I'm happy that this was also a good move. Okay, cool.
After something like this, these pawns are a serious liability around the king.
Yeah.
So white's better.
Yeah, I see. This should definitely favor whites for sure. Yeah.
But this is also very good for white, for exactly what you said. White has really good attacking chances against the king. Not because the king is currently weak; it has a good pawn shield, but just because the queen is such a powerful attacker, and black doesn't have a queen, so we can point the bishop over there, maybe bring the knight over somehow, send the pieces over to the king side, and without a queen, it's much harder for black to defend.
That's right. So this also is about experience and intuition, right? Because this is not like, you cannot calculate this to understand these long-term factors and trusting the queen's strength. It also comes with years of experience, I believe, right? So playing and judging and developing your intuition. Yeah, so I was happy. This was a good puzzle, by the way, Nate. Was it human made or just from a real game, buddy? Because how did that queen come to b6?
Yeah, it was from a real game. What I've been doing lately is I just whenever I come across an interesting position in a student's game, especially if they struggle with it in some way, those are the ones I like to save. So quite often they don't look like not necessarily a traditional puzzle where like there's a forced win or a tactical sequence.
Yeah.
But I also like it like positions that are rich with a lot of ideas. So it's not just one move. There may be multiple lines that are that are interesting.
Perfect.
In this case,
Perfect.
yeah, it did come from a real game. Black did, Black did something a bit weird with their queen, where it sort of came, around like this or something.
Right. I see. I see. Some strange way to end up on b6.
In the game, White played Rook B1, but this was unnecessary because as we saw,
Because that one wasn't hanging.
that's not necessary. You could play Bishop G5, and
Yes.
if Black takes, then this
Yeah.
this trap comes into play.
Patterns are so important, right? Pattern recognition. This one.
Yeah. Okay, should we look at the next one?
Let's look at the next one. I haven't seen anything, so if there are some moves, you can just close it. Is it? I'm not looking anywhere.
Yeah, and this one was Black to play.
Okay, Black to play. Black to play. Wow, this looks already much more chaotic than the other one. Black to play. Okay, so in terms of quick judgment of the king's safety and so on. Okay, first of all, what I'm seeing first, I'm just seeing this tension between rooks, of course. I'm seeing the knight on f6 is hanging and knight on b3 is buried. Just very quick assessment of what my eyes are seeing right now. Terrible knight on b3 and white king. I mean, black king is also slightly exposed, so I'm not sure how you would compare the king's safety. But somehow black is more pieces concentrated on the king's side, right? Like the knight on b3 is terribly misplaced, for example.
Yeah, it's that knight we were talking about with.
Yeah, we discussed this. Yeah, buried pieces, of course. I made a course about this. The art of burying pieces. Ulf Andersson said once, he never seen a good knight in chess on b3 or b6.
Yeah.
Like they're almost always terribly placed on those squares. So my hunch is that black should be better. So definitely we are playing for a win. That's my hunch. But of course, it's not like a quiet position. There are so many things that are hanging. Yeah, so that's what makes it difficult. It's like a similar puzzle that I need to visualize and evaluate a certain forcing line, like that, or is it like evaluate this position?
Yeah, well,
Which side would you like to play?
Black to play. Can I flip the board around? How do I?
Yeah, you just press X. Just press X.
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah. So, are there any forcing lines available that we should consider?
Good point. Yeah. I mean, of course, rook takes e1 is forcing. It just captures the rook. What else? Knight e4. Even knight e4 is a forcing move because I'm hitting the queen and, well, I mean, if you take my knight, then there are queen h1 potential in the position. But against knight e4, of course, you can even take on f8 followed by queen h8 checks. What else is there? Of course, there's queen takes f3. If king takes f3, then knight e5 picks up the queen. If queen takes f3, then there's rook takes e1, right? So we can actually get two rooks for the queen in this position. That's also possible.
Yeah, and that's to me that's the really interesting evaluation challenge here is you can give your queen for two rooks and then then how do you evaluate the resulting position?
Okay, that's very interesting actually. Queen takes f3, so queen takes is forced and rook takes e1. So we are trying to evaluate that position. Yes, very, very good question. Equal number of pawns, two rooks versus queen. Again, my judgment is because of the knight on b3, like quick intuitive judgment. Because of the knight on b3, black is better, I would say. Like black can organize his pieces and the knight's always going to be terrible. Like I don't see how it improves. Like knight d2 invites some rook d8, maybe some other moves later on. I would definitely play the position with black, although having said that, my king is also not so safe. Yeah, there's not so many pawns covering my king. And I know the strength of a queen, she's a very powerful piece on an open board. So she can definitely annoy me, so to speak, at that moment with so many checks, like my knight is frozen, for example, on f6, and so on and so on. It's hard. That will take real, time for me to decide on that position.
Yeah, this one, also from a student's game, this one was surprising to me because it turns out that position, at least the engine, really likes it for black.
Okay.
After giving up the queen.
Yep.
For the two rooks, and what was so surprising to me about this is typically when you think about queen versus two rooks, you look at the king position, right? And with both kings, in particular with black's king so exposed, that's often a sign that the queen is going to be, either create an attack or in a worst case scenario, create a perpetual check. You can see in this case, it's actually a huge advantage for black.
Does it give like minus 3.5? Wow.
Minus 3.5. So essentially, it's saying black is winning. And I think the way I would think about this is this knight, for the moment,
So
if
terrible.
black is almost up a piece.
Yes. So terrible.
By eliminating the two rooks, you're essentially eliminating a lot of defenders and
Right.
preparing to attack with your remaining pieces, forcing the queen to be the only defender.
But how do you actually win? Because to my mind, even knight d2, for example,
Yeah.
yeah, like that knight can try to improve.
So here's where evaluation and calculation go hand in hand. To be winning, black has to find this move knight e4, which is not obvious.
Ooh, not obvious at all. Okay.
Right? So it's
Okay,
always,
okay.
you don't want to
Yes.
be too vague and hand wavy about these evaluations because it may depend on a specific move. And
Specific
here it's even
move.
very important. This, if you didn't have
There's
this
also knight
knight
g5.
block, it would be a different
Ooh.
story.
Very, very specific position. I see.
So this is definitely a trickier one because
For sure.
it runs counter to the usual tendency.
For sure. I would say, yeah, this was very tricky because to my mind, our king is exposed. How do you organize an attack? I mean, you might say black can also attack the white king, but it's not so easy. And it seems like knight e2 can improve the knight, but then there's knight e4 potential. Wow, okay, this was tricky. So it would be wrong, yeah, to stop at that moment maybe and judge in itself. You also maybe need to see this knight e4 resource. Then the problem is when exactly should you stop, because
Exactly.
there's always a next move. Yeah, that's why chess is hard.
That's why it's so tricky because inevitably when you're playing a real game, there's some rules you can apply, but there's also a lot of intuition, and you're sort of feeling it out. Often it's not possible to analyze everything to where it's all clear. You sort of have to make a judgment call.
Yeah, but you see, my intuition was correct, Nate. Remember? By the way, that's good that we are recording this session because in the future scientists can use this data, to evaluate quality of human judgments and evaluations and so on. So it's good that we record this. My first hunch was that, that knight is terrible, so I'm very happy. And even I judged that to be better for black intuitively because of the knight on b3. So in some sense that was correct judgment, but of course I haven't seen knight e4 resource at that point. Yeah, without seeing knight e4 resource, I judge it somehow better for black. Interesting.
All right, should we look at one more?
Let's look at one more. Yeah, I'm so well trained today after talking to Andras Todd for 2 hours. I'm on fire.
Okay, so this one is from some opening analysis.
Yeah.
I'm working on my semi-Slav course.
Ah, cool.
Okay, so maybe we'll see how much visualization we could go for.
Okay.
So here, one move for black is b4. Actually, I think I recommend bishop b7 in my course, but b4 is also a playable move.
Yeah.
So white can move the knight away, but white can also try to go for this forcing line, where they play e4.
E5.
Or e5, excuse me. The idea being that, if knight d5, for example, then you get the option of playing knight e4, and you keep your knight closer to the center.
Okay.
So we could have this line e5, b takes c3, e takes f6. And if they want, both sides can keep capturing. So b takes c3, e takes f6, c takes b2, f takes g7, b takes a1 queen, g takes h8 queen. So perhaps one side or the other should not do this. But then my question is, in that position with 4 queens on the board, what is the evaluation there?
Oh boy, this will be a real visualization challenge.
Yeah.
Okay.
So
okay.
yeah, we're going quite far down the line.
Wow. Okay, guys. So if in case you missed it, so Nate asked us to evaluate e5, b takes c3, e takes f6, c takes b2, right? F takes g7, b takes a1 equals queen, and then g takes h8 equals queen. That's what we are trying to evaluate. It's black to play.
What's the material there? That's a tough one.
That's a tough one indeed. That's how I usually count. Yeah, so I lost a knight and a pawn, and you know, I lost my pawn on g7 and the knight on f6, and white lost knight on c3 and the pawn on b2. Right, so we sort of lost equal material until we reached that point. So black lost knight on f6 and pawn on g7, and white lost the knight on c3 and pawn on b2. So they are sort of equal. If this position was extra pawn for black, we have an extra pawn at that moment. Is black.
Yep, exactly. Yeah, so it's still a pawn up for black.
Yeah. Yeah. So we have a queen on a1. It's actually it's our move right now. But obviously there are some issues potentially. There are some issues, maybe some bishop h6, because our bishop is pinned. You know, it's not the same because our king is still in the center, while their king is already safe on g1. You see, like, without looking at anything, by using pure logic, right? There are 4 queens on the board. Queens are the best attackers. So king safety becomes even more important in a position like this, you know? If they ask you to, there are 4 queens in this board, what is the most important factor? King safety, of course, becomes even more important, right? Because there are 4 queens potentially. So immediately I'm a little scared as black because my king is stuck in the center and I don't even see how exactly I, move it to a safety, because I mean, how am I going to even castle long? It's almost impossible. Meanwhile, the bishop on g2 is also a good piece. Typical Catalan bishop. But white king is very, very safe on g1. How can the black queens ever attack that piece? Right? So without even looking at any lines, by closing my eyes and using pure logic, I'm trusting that because of king safety issues, white should be better. That's my hunch, Nate.
Yep, yeah, and you got this one beautifully.
Cool.
So cool. In this position, black is up a pawn, but this is an example of a position where being up a pawn has no relevance because, the K in K map, the king safety is absolutely the trump card.
Right.
And white's king is totally safe with this nice fianchetto, and black's king is caught in the center. So I think this is even objectively a huge advantage.
Winning maybe. Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
Because
okay.
white is going to do something like, for example, knight g5, queen h5.
Right.
And essentially these 2 queens are just going to be creating an unstoppable attack against black's king.
Beautiful. You see, I have some sort of aphantasia. I think it's hard for me to crystal clear visualize stuff, but I'm good at logic. I'm just good at this kind of logical chain of thinking. So in this case, I sort of use that roadmap in some sense without crystal clearly visualizing this position. I somehow trust king safety will be much more important.
Yeah, I don't have you. I've been reading this guy Aidan Rayner who talks about visualization, but he actually says different people do it very differently. Some players have a clear visual image of the board, but some players, including even very strong players, don't have a clear visual image. But it sounds like what you're describing, they sort of construct things logically.
Yes, definitely. I use my verbal thinking in this sense to describe the situation to myself. Yes, I'm happy that I was right. I couldn't guess it was plus 4.8 or something, but definitely I will take white.
I mean, you don't usually get 4 queens on the board in a middle game, so
yeah, very unusual.
Actually, have you guessed the theme yet?
Oh, great question. Great question. The theme is so far king safety, because the first position was also about king safety and the queen's role, right? The connection between queen and the king safety.
Exactly. Yeah. It's about the queen as an attacker, and
yes.
And this is so. The queen is of course the most powerful piece, but it's especially strong as an attacker against the king. Let me show you one more, because this
Beautiful.
one is also
beautiful. By the way, even the first position I showed you today connected this, Karpov-Kasparov, king safety.
We hadn't prepared that, but
we hadn't prepared this. Totally randomly, we came to the same conclusion. Nice.
Okay, so this is actually from my most recent over the board tournament, and we had this nearly symmetrical position. Actually, maybe before white moves. So you said Kasparov says you should evaluate it not even knowing who's to move. So it's nearly symmetrical, but we could even evaluate it. Here, who would you say stands better?
Wow, this is hard. This is hard. Interesting. This is hard. My hunch. You know what my hunch is? Black is better in this position. That's my hunch.
And why?
I mean, first of all, intuition definitely precedes sometimes words, so that's my hunch. Now I will try to break it down to the why and the words and evaluations. I would say the knight on c3 being a loose piece, right? Could be attacked later on with some moves because that knight also fights for those central squares. It can be destabilized. Black can follow it up with knight e4 to intensify the central pressure. There's a square like b4 on the board that we can use at some point. I don't like that b3 a4 formation so much for white on the queen side. Rook c8s are coming at some point. Maybe, even queen d7 followed by bishop f5 plan comes to mind. We can exchange off our bad bishop for the good bishop later on. Maybe grip on e4 and some ideas like this. Is going on in my head. Is that correct?
Yeah. So essentially, I mean, the position's almost symmetrical, but the big difference is, well, I guess black has one tempo up.
Rook e8, of course, yeah.
But that's maybe not such a big difference. But the bigger difference is that white's pawns are one more square farther advanced. And in this case, it's much worse to be farther up because this b4 square is weak, whereas the b5 square is protected. So black could use that for knight b4 or bishop b4. And the b3 pawn could also be weak. You pointed out this knight is loose. That's true. So it's a little better for black. In chess, it's not always better to be farther forward. In this case, the pawns up one square is not what you want.
Right. So maybe the best move for white, if pawns could go backward, would be a4 back to a2, right? That could be a good move for white, potentially.
Go backwards.
Yes.
But so far, it's objectively only a small advantage for black. But okay, now my opponent played sort of a curious move. He played queen b1.
Queen b1. Okay.
Now the question is, does this change anything? How should we react as black?
Queen b1. They are removing the queen from the king side. That's what I'm seeing first. I don't even see their real intention. Like, do they really want to play b4, for example? No, because I control b4. Okay, they want to intensify maybe some pressure on the long diagonal, on that diagonal, but there are no clear targets. Maybe they want to stop us from playing queen d7, bishop f5 plan, right? Maybe that's the only thought. But maybe queen d7 anyway, because now the king side, I start to see some potential on the king side, by the way, for some reason, yeah? maybe some, queen d7 followed by sacrifice on h3 even comes to my mind, Sacrifice on h3 followed by queen takes h3, hitting the knight, pressurizing the h2 point, maybe some rook lifts are coming on the king side, some knight g4s, and somehow I'm seeing some potential for black on the king side. But that's my hunch, by the way. I'm not fully done yet, but for some reason the queen moving away from king side is sort of signaling that I can maybe play on the king side myself. Is a plan.
Yeah, absolutely. So in the game, in this position, my plan, I was thinking probably next move I'll play rook c8 to just bring my last piece.
Normal.
And look at this. So my opponent played queen b1, and I sort of thought, that's kind of weird, but okay, rook c8 still looks good, so I did this. Which is okay, but in fact, yeah, you're right. The better move is to play queen d7, and then...
Oh boy, I'm on fire today, Nate.
Cool.
Yes.
And actually, maybe surprisingly, this sacrifice is just about unstoppable, right? Like if white plays some sort of normal move, and we do this is just a crushing attack because the knight is attacked.
Yeah.
This knight can come in with bishop h2, and white just can't answer all of these threats. And yeah, you're absolutely right. The big signal to attack is this queen going over to the other side of the board.
The queen left the king side. Yes.
And being unable to defend. So whenever you see in any position where you can involve your queen in the attack and the opponent can't use their queen to defend, that's a huge signal that your attack is likely to succeed.
That's a beautiful piece of chunk right there. Yeah.
I also like another move that's also good is you can also do a queen c8.
Yeah.
With the same idea, but also...
looking at the knight on c3.
Yeah.
Yes.
Now, it actually doesn't really make much of a difference because you're going to take on h3 regardless anyway. But this move looks very advanced. If someone plays queen c8, you're like, wow, that
Right.
guy's good. Although it doesn't really make much of a difference. I think that the engine says, the best chance it can find for white is it wants to do something like this, just giving up the pawn, but at least blocking off that diagonal and not getting checkmated.
Yeah,
Obviously we're going to be pretty happy to win a pawn.
for sure. For
So in
sure.
the game, I missed that opportunity. Rook c8, rook c1, queen d7. So now my opponent was in time with bishop f1.
Just in time to play
Yeah.
bishop f1. That's also
And
the
now
key. Yeah.
I still had a very nice position because my pieces are more active. But if I had paused to recognize the downside of this queen b1 move, maybe I could have ended the game quickly with that attack.
That's amazing because when you first showed me that position, I couldn't guess, the game will be by that decisive attack on the king side. That was
Yeah, I
not,
mean, it looks at this point like it seems like quite a quiet position, right? It's
yeah,
nearly symmetrical. There's not really much of a hint of an attack, but
yeah,
actually, yeah, just by misplacing this queen far away from the king, it creates this opportunity.
it's amazing. So that's already a great piece of information. When the opponent's queen is going to, let's say, Siberia, they are leaving
Yeah,
their king
as
deserted.
Danny King would say, right? The
Right. The
queen in
queen in
Siberia.
Siberia, the queen in Siberia. That's the key for us. So maybe look for more active options and maybe some sacrifices. But if the rook was already on e1 in the initial position, right, Nate, as you mentioned, then bishop f1 was always a choice, right?
Yeah,
They could always play bishop f1.
yeah,
What a
exactly. So
small
in chess,
change.
the specifics always trump the general. So
Yes,
you still have to calculate.
it's amazing. Yeah. Cool one. I like this one. And again, it's about our team, right? Like queen and the king today.
Hmm.
It's all about our team. Cool.
All right. Well, maybe that's enough examples.
That's enough examples for today. I mean, I want to finish on a high note. By the way, I was acing your puzzles mostly,
Yeah.
although I missed that variation. I could trap the queen on a5, but besides that, I think I'm very happy about my performance.
Yeah, you got him
Great positions,
pretty much perfectly. So well done.
amazing. Maybe I should really start playing OTB. I'm curious about my level.
Well, give it a shot. Although I have
I read your post.
yeah,
I know you don't like them so
my
much.
latest post was essentially like rage quitting OTB. So
I know. I read it.
proceed with caution.
Yeah. Yeah, you gave me motivation and hope at least before my hopes are destroyed potentially when I try, but worth a try. Yes, so again, guys, please read this book. It's a beautiful one, a little short book, like from 2 years ago. It's been already 2 years, by the way, Nate. A little like a grandmaster, one of its kind in the chess world in terms of chess literature. A book dedicated to evaluating positions with some puzzles on visualizing and evaluating, just like we did today. Some quartets, four positions to compare to each other and judge, and so on and so on. They really compiled very good positions, just like Nate presented to us guys today. So please go and check that. Nate, your course is coming as well, right? Chessable course is soon.
Yeah, so
It's coming.
I'm finishing up my semi-Slav course. So far I've got my course for white with one knight f3.
Yes.
I've got black versus e4 with the Nimzovich Sicilian, and so I'm working on finishing the final part of the trilogy. So this is black versus everything but e4. D4,
Cool.
knight f3, c4, all the other moves
Yeah.
based on the semi-Slav. So just finishing up that now. I believe it's supposed to be out May 2nd. I
Yes.
still have to record those videos. But yeah, once that's out, then those three will form, well, if you want, a full repertoire for both colors.
Yeah.
And they're all, they're called 100 repertoires, which meaning it's 100 total lines, which is shorter. So
Man.
the idea
Yeah.
is that, it's to make it manageable, and realistic for a club player to use
Yeah.
that.
Yeah. I haven't done any opening course yet. That should be my next project. I totally understand from a business perspective. And maybe I can learn from your examples of creating short and, good course that speaks to most improvers and without overwhelming them. Giving them enough information, but also without overwhelming them. So that's, I think, an art in itself. So hopefully I will learn it myself at some point. Not Najdorf, but something more.
Yeah, the
you
Naito
know?
would be very tough to do in 100 lines.
Yeah.
Also, so I'm doing a little bit of an experiment with this one where I'm creating the course, but I'm also running a live course, which is just wrapping up soon.
Yeah.
But essentially, a course on the same opening, the semi-Slav, but where we meet for a video lesson weekly, and that
Right.
really impressed on me. I think we've heard that like memorizing long theoretical lines is not that important. So at first I had heard that, I knew that, but doing the course with a bunch of real players and seeing their games and how their opponents are reacting made me realize that it's even more true than I understood. Like
Yeah.
when we look at the games, even strong players, 1800, 2000 plus, very rare that we're getting like long theoretical lines.
I see.
The opponents are deviating much early, so that just made me appreciate even more. For most players, it's not about memorizing long lines. You have to have some understanding of
Right.
what you're playing for, and when your opponent does something different, how do you react?
Right. Those middle game understandings, those chunks, those evaluations, as we discussed today, definitely is helpful. Yeah, looking forward to it, by the way. Check it out, guys, as well. You can always contact Nate, by the way, for one-on-one consultations and also join his group lessons and so on. I mean, I will include all of his links on this video description. And it's always a pleasure talking to you, Nate. Thank you so much for coming and discussing chess with me. And I'm sure we'll see each other again at some point in the future.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Yes.
Yeah.
See you very soon. Bye-bye.
All right.
Bye.